picking up this spring wall art kit. It's got lots of different steps, so let's get started.
Your kit comes with lots of different parts and pieces, but we're going to want to clear this out a little bit so that we can work on the very first step, which is going to be our canvas. Our canvas has a top and a bottom. Do you know how I know? The top has these little cutouts in them. That's going to help hang our piece up later.
I brought over these bits of tissue paper because that's going to be our next step. This tissue paper is actually going to stain or dye our canvas just by using some water. Because these tissue papers will kind of bleed out their colors or put their colors on your fingers, I like to keep my papers, my tissue papers, inside a little container or maybe even a little bowl or a plate. That way that when you're touching the pieces, you can make sure you're grabbing just one at a time. Just helps with not getting other pieces wet while you're working. Let's talk about our canvas. We want to get the whole thing wet. It's what makes this process work. We have some options on getting it wet depending on the tools that you have at home. The first thing is going to be a faucet. You can just run it underneath the kitchen sink. It's going to get nice and wet, and then you're going to want to put it on top of some type of safe tray, or maybe you even have a plastic bag that you could put it on top of, or a cookie sheet wrapped in tin foil. Maybe a big trash bag goes on top of the table, or those fun party plastic tablecloths could be an option too, because this is going to be wet and it's going to be wet for quite a while. We want it to dry naturally. Option 2 is going to be using a paper towel and some water, or a rag and some water. I'm going to go with the rag option just so you can kind of see how this works. So you dip it in a little bit. You don't want it to drip too much. And then I'm going to come over and press it into my canvas. Water and press. Option 3 is going to use our handy spray bottle to get the whole canvas nice and wet. This one's probably the most fun. All right, my whole canvas is now wet, which means I'm ready to start bringing over my bits of tissue paper. Now, I've cut them up into shapes like this triangle. Magic. Or I even have some square shapes in here. And I want to cover up the entire canvas with all the little pieces of paper. Now what we don't want is some of these little pieces that are staying kind of their original color. We want to kind of help press them down a little bit, because then we know they're wet. And when they're wet, they're gonna take some of the color that's from the paper and put it onto our canvas. I don't know if you can tell, but it's already starting to ooze a little bit from the red even onto that yellow. It is also totally okay to layer colors on top of each other. You might also even want to rip some of your papers. So you could have maybe a different texture that's on here, or a different edge to each piece. So it doesn't have to be a perfect straight edge. It could have a bit of a ripple to it. My fingers have been stained from a different project, but these might stain your fingers too. Also, your fingers might get a little bit wet. I like to keep a paper towel or a rag close by so that I can dry my fingers off as I'm working, as I'm layering these squares. Sometimes they'll go off of the edge of the canvas. That's okay. Sometimes you might even like to keep a fold in the piece. That's also all right. The idea is to get this whole canvas covered in these pages. I'm gonna keep working away. Let's say as you're working, kind of like what's happening to me, and your pieces are still a little bit dry, might mean we need some more water to be added to our canvas. We can Utilize our spray bottle. If you don't have one of those though, you can still come back and take your rag and gently press on top of those pieces. You don't want them to come up. That's why we're going to be gentle with our presses. Kind of keep moving. I've got all my pieces on there and my whole canvas is covered. This means step 1 is done, and I could be done for the day and maybe continue the next part on another day. The idea is to let it sit in maybe a sunny or warm space and dry all on its own. The little tissue paper pieces are gonna start to come up on their own, maybe even start to blow away, which is totally awesome. It can do this step all by itself. Once it's all dry, then we'll help remove the pieces.
Next up, we want to bring over our wooden beads, our wooden dowel that's attached to the string, because we're going to decorate these with some markers. Now, if you've been to my studio before and taken a class or a camp, you know I keep markers in a fun big container. These are water-based markers, which means they're gonna ooze a little bit when they come in contact with some water. Some other markers that might be a really cool idea, if you have them, are these scented markers. These are also water-based. I colored in some beads and the stick, and I wanted to show you a little trick on how to get some color on your string. It helps if you can hold with one hand and then color in with the other. Your fingers might get a little bit colored, but that's okay. Another technique might be to pull down one end and follow the line. Got my string colored, my stick colored, and a few of these beads, and now I'm gonna take out a brush and a little bit of water. And this is where we get to transform our markers into more like watercolors, or it'll start to tie-dye and blend. So you can see my water even changed because I'm picking up some of those colors. Sometimes these beads can be tricky to paint, so I'm going to put them on a pipe cleaner. This pipe cleaner has been used over and over again. Totally awesome to recycle and reuse. Time to take another break while we wait for these to dry. If you have Sharpie markers at home, you could decorate the beads that already have color on them. I decided to add polka dots to a couple of them. These have dried oh so nicely and are starting to just slide right off that canvas. Now I tend to save the pieces for like a collage project. I think they end up drying really kind of cool. Definitely don't look like they did before. Neither does my canvas. It's a slightly satisfying getting to peel these pieces up. Sometimes a lot of them come up. Sometimes it's just one at a time. I have some areas that have blended nicely. I have some areas that maybe got a little less water, but I think this texture is really cool. I've decided to turn my tray so that the holes in the canvas are at the very top. I'm going to start to add some of these fun texture pieces like the gems and beads and the feathers to my canvas. I think I'll start with the beads. You could choose to put your extra texture elements on top of your canvas any way you like. Maybe there's a pattern or a design or it could just be willy-nilly wherever. I'm going to do a bit of a mandala, which is a circular pattern. I'm going to start roughly in the middle of my canvas and start to build a pattern that kind of goes in this circular motion. I'm dipping this cotton swab in some glue and then placing it on one of the edges of the beads and then attaching it to the canvas. Got the beads the way I like them, and now I'm going to introduce some of these gems. Same deal, a little bit of glue goes on at the back of each gem before you press it onto your canvas. I poured some of the gems out and flipped them over so I could see all their colors. That way I can start to arrange in a pattern of my choosing. Little by little, the circular pattern gets bigger and bigger. I have added the gems and the beads, and I have some of these guinea feathers, which have the fun polka dots on them. They don't start out these fun colors. They are turned these fun colors. I have not glued them on because I wanted to see where I should add them before I glued them. Then I'm planning on gluing just along this center seam so that the feather part can still blow in the wind. In this area over here, we're going to have our post or our bar that's going to hold up our canvas. So be sure not to glue, if you've got something in this area, be sure not to glue it all the way down. I'm planning on having this feather go over that wooden post. You'll notice I have some glue showing from the feathers or even the beads or the sequins or gems, but that's totally okay because it's going to dry clear. I say that looks pretty great. I'm going to let this dry before I put the post on with the beads. My mandala is dry. All these parts and pieces are stuck on there really well. If any of them pop off at any time, just glue them right back on and give it a little bit of extra time to dry. When you're ready though, we're going to attach the stick to the top of your canvas. And we're starting with the end that doesn't have the string on it. And we're gonna be feeding it through the holes. We wanna start by going underneath our canvas first and then through the first hole that's been poked. This is so that I can see more of my stick as opposed to more of my canvas. That's just my choice. So the next thing we're gonna do is feed this through. Oh, you'll notice I'm going over that feather. That's okay, I'll be able to move the feather later. So I'm gonna go through this center one. So it goes behind the canvas here, and it pops right back out the third hole. I'm gonna slide it all the way through and feed it under the canvas here. I now have the post all the way through and it holds up my canvas. Next up is gonna be beadwork. I have the string that's been colored as well as a bit of tape at the end. The tape is gonna act like a needle. Right now it's actually peeling up a little bit, so I'm just gonna squish it back down so that I can start adding my beads. You can make any kind of pattern that you want. Maybe you even have some other beads that you want to add. One side already has its attachment on, and it's a double knot with a little tassel at the end. So I'm going to tie the end, after all of my beads are on, to the post in about the same spot. And I'm gonna do a double knot there as well. I trimmed off the tape, we don't need it anymore. There's that double knot. Yours isn't going to look like mine, and that's totally awesome. I actually can't wait to see how yours turned out. Send me a picture.